Hey, welcome everyone to another episode of the Jonathan Project Podcast, where iron is sharpening iron. And we take the inspiration for this show from Jonathan and his good friend David and future king. We help men navigate the complexities of the world around them. And if you want me and Jason to come on out to a men's event, if you have a business function, something where you found inspiration from listening to our show, please reach out to us at thejonathanprojectpodcast at gmail.com. Again, thejonathanprojectpodcast at gmail.com. Jason, good to see you.
Welcome to the show.
Welcome to the show. You know,
Welcome.
it's good that digital doesn't cost you anything. Like you
Right.
you can restart, because this is the second week in a row me and Jason have been having a good time laughing. And for you guys who don't know, this is like take number 4 to get to the point in the show, but that's okay. We like to have fun.
That is true. That is true. So, well, how's it going? How's it going this week?
It's cold. It's cold again in Florida. I don't know. It's like somebody's drunk winter showed up again and knocked on my door.
Dude, that's bad. It's cold here in Alabama.
Well, that's real cold there. Like here, it's like, it's like 42, and I'm like, man, this is not good.
That sends people into shock down there.
It does. You know, it's like, what is happening?
It got down into the 20s last night, so I got up this morning, took care of the famous chicken drama of, thawed out their water and took care of them.
I love it. The chicken kingdom.
Yep. Good times. All right. So this week,
what are we talking about?
So I was kind of thinking, and here's the deal. So my nephew also, before we get started, hey, want to make sure, send some prayers out to the Avery family. They got some things that are going on. Yeah. So got those prayer requests in and want to make sure that we include those. No. Okay. So I was out this past week, and it was my nephew's Cub Scout get a badge kind of ascension thing, right? Mm-hmm. As I'm sitting there, I'm sitting in the back, and what I notice is there are a ton of these dads, right? And they're on their phones, they're not paying attention, and so forth, right? They're just not paying attention. Sure. And it's their kids up there. And I'm thinking to myself, and what's going on? Like, you're sending a message to that child. And it made me stop and think about Proverbs, right? In chapter 17, Solomon, way smarter than I am. In chapter 17:6, he goes, children are the crown of old men, and the glory of children are their fathers. In other words, parents are the pride of their children. They're not too worried if the grandparents are paying attention, although grandparents are always paying attention, right? Yeah. But they're watching for their parents to pay attention. And, it really dawned on me as I'm sitting there, like, these guys are sending a message, and it's a worthless message, right? Yeah. Yeah. I'm not judging. I'm just discerning that the fruit you're producing is not very good. Yeah. And, you miss it. One day it's going to cross guys' minds. Yeah. That when your kids were little, they waited on you at the door to come home from work. When they come home from college, you'll be waiting on them to show up.
No, that's very true, Jason.
And that's it, right? You'll wait on them to call. You'll wait on them to do whatever, to spend time, anything to spend time with them. And we have to be very purposeful in our conversations with them, in both the words we say and our actions. Right? Yeah. I thought about that quite a bit.
No, I'm excited to be able to bring this conversation to guys because, as me and you discussed, different generations, and, we grew up with, that post-World War II parents, our grandparents were a part of the greatest generation. And so I feel like sometimes that intentional communication, whether it was criticism or compliments, whenever they may have come, it did leave you as a child kind of like, man, like, what is going on? And you were looking for those moments. I'll never forget, fence had kind of broken down, and we're gonna put it back up. That's what you're just gonna do. And I had an old school post hole digger, and I wasn't doing it quite right. And I remember being told point blank by my dad, like, "You're gonna figure it out, and we're gonna just keep digging holes until you get it right."
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, and it was like this intense kind of criticism. But fathers can shape their children's faith, identity, and character, and we have to always be mindful that they're little sponges right
Yeah.
around us, soaking up everything that you do, good and bad.
Hmm.
And make no bones about it, it is an eye-opening event when you come to realize as a child, and there's a moment that happens, it's never really said or spoken, when you realize that your parents have flaws and mistakes and issues. They
Yeah.
went from, like you said, being that mythical kind of hero and perfect in your eyes, and now being a parent, I get it, it's kind of not fair, it's not right, but it's the truth. And
Yeah.
it makes me more aware of how I need to be intentional in how I'm communicating, verbally or non-verbally.
Yeah.
Ephesians 6 and 4 is really going to be the scripture, guys and gals, and everyone that's listening out there for
Sure.
this whole conversation. Fathers, do not provoke, or mothers, do not provoke your children to anger, but bring them up in the discipline and instruction of the Lord.
Yeah.
So we have to be intentional in all that we do.
As I've gotten older, I've realized there's a lot less crisis. Or maybe it's the fact that I've seen some real crisis. And I think that's where it goes back to, and just kind of hitting back as well on the Proverbs thing. On 17, he's like, children are the crown of old men. I think as you get older, you're just like, man, it's going to work out. That's great, right? Like we're keeping the bus between the lanes, and as a Christian dad, my number one Northern Star compass moment is, are my children growing closer to Christ overall or less, right? What's their growth? Are they headed towards Jesus or are they not? Are children going to make mistakes? Yes. Are you going to make mistakes? If you don't believe that, head on out to the local swimming pool. Today's a great day to test this theory because it's super cold. If you can walk on water, great. But if you can't, it'll be self-evident in a few minutes. Most of us can't.
Yeah.
We're not perfect. Just like you said about in Ephesians 6:4, don't provoke your kids to anger. You know, our children are more than the the DNA that we gave them, right?
Yeah.
They're not mini me's. They aren't. They may share a lot of characteristics, but they're different people, and how we handle that's important, right?
Yeah.
How we foster that.
Yeah. I think it's a good point, Jason. Like there's two sides of this coin as far as we're talking about being intentional and communicating. One is criticism, right? And I share that personal example, like, hey, that criticism back in the day, hold the flashlight straight, like don't move the light. Like
Where
a
I
lot
can
of
see it.
us,
Hold the flashlight where I can see it, not you.
not where you can see it, but a lot of us guys had, or give me the Phillips head or
Yeah.
needle nose pliers, whatever. Well, we all have those kind of experiences of going to the tool
Yes.
chest and getting the wrong thing and getting it tore off the frame.
Oh,
But being intentional in criticism is not a negative thing. And
no.
I wanna be able to make sure that we don't leave guys confused. Like, are you doing this gentle parenting kind of thing? Are you guys trying to be free range parents? Is that what you No, that's not what we're saying, guys, because the
No.
Bible is very clear that you're supposed to discipline. God disciplines us. But you have to correct from a sense of love, right?
Yeah.
Proverbs 3:12 says, "For the Lord reproves him who he loves, as a father the son in whom he delights," right?
Yeah.
Colossians 3:21, "Fathers, do not embitter your children or they will become discouraged." So, I think about when we correct our children, we have to do it in a way that's going to lead to some growth, that is going to not build resentment, and explaining, hey, this is why we're having
Hmm.
a course correction. This is why I'm trying to guide you that, hey, who you think are your friends and they're out here doing all this crazy stuff, that's not where we want to go. But you
Yeah.
have to be in a place where I'm not judging you for making similar mistakes or whatever, but I'm trying to help you grow and to get to a better place. If that makes, some sense for the folks out
Yeah. If you think I'm a free range parent, my kids right now would be laughing.
there.
They would absolutely they would be like, who is this man on this screen? It's no, you gotta be there. You're an active part, right?
Yeah.
And I think about it, the things, the words we say, the things we do. And I do think a lot about in Samuel, right? Samuel 20 30 through 42, it talks about where David, he tells Jonathan, he says, "Hey man, Saul's going to try to kill me." And he's like, "Nah, it's my dad. He's not going to do it." They go back and forth, and he says, "All right, here's the banquet. Tell him I had to leave." So sure enough, he tells him, he's like, "Where's David?" And Jonathan goes, "He had to go meet with his brethren." And that's the King James Version, brethren. And he goes, and so Saul yells at him, and he basically is like, "You're not my son." Like, I don't know, you
Yeah.
know, yeah. He pulls a Smokey and the Bandit, Jackie Gleason, not my kid. And he yells at him, and then Jonathan defends David because that's what kids do, They,
Yeah, that was strike number 2.
yeah, he decided it's time to speak up, and so he does. And the next thing is Saul chunks a javelin at him, right?
Yeah.
Throws a javelin at him, and which obviously damaged their relationship. But even in the end, they were together, right?
Yeah.
Uh, but you got to think about it as dads. Are we tossing javelins? Are we guiding, or what are we doing?
No, that's
And,
good.
and
Yeah.
those words mean something, right?
Yeah.
When you correct somebody, it's got to be purposeful, and you got to do it without crushing that spirit,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
This isn't, hey man, this isn't counseling where we got to get to base zero.
Yeah.
It's not that.
No.
It's let's move forward with very purposeful conversations.
No, I love it, Jason. And I think another example as we, we're talking about like being intentional with criticism and coming from a perspective of love. I thought about and I looked at this week one of our favorite stories to talk about men on here, which we haven't dove into fully, but it's Samson and his father Manoah, right? His warning, and this is something that translates even to modern times for us: warnings against ungodly influences, right? That is
Yeah.
probably one of the biggest and I know my good friend on the screen is entering the teenage years, and I'm fast behind them with a son on that. But Judges 14:2-3, Samson's father warns him not to marry a Philistine woman, knowing it will pull him away from God. So imagine, yeah, I mean, a lot
Yeah.
of fathers, men out there listening, and you get to that situation where you can see something with your son, your daughter, like, man, this is not the person that is best for you, or this friend group is
Mhm.
not the best for you, or this, school choice is not the best for you, right? And you have to be able to guide your children through making those wise choices and in those relationships, friendships, or in those big decisions. So I think about something that you said, Jason, is that if you don't start right where you're at right now and start building a platform to fight from, you can't
Yeah.
go when that time comes, you're faced with one of those decisions, you're not really gonna have something to stand on. And this is why we say you have to be intentional. You have to stand and you have to be the one in the house sometimes that says, "Hey, everybody's going right, but we're going left. And
Yeah.
here's why." It's not for dad just to be like, "I'm anti-phone. I'm anti you talking to whatever it is,
Yeah.
anti wearing that kind of clothing." It's because there are ungodly consequences that that's going to come down the pipe by you going down this path, and that's being intentional in criticism, and that's not a bad thing, but you have to be able to step up and do that.
No, that's absolutely. I was thinking about that phrase of the ground you're going to fight from when they are teenagers is the ground you've already won when they were small.
Yeah.
That's not to say it's a lost cause. If they're teenagers, you just have an uphill battle.
Yeah.
And it means you got to spend time with them and you've got to be a part of that life. Never forget that you are the pride of their life. It is the way it is. It's children they may pretend like they don't like you, but truth is they do, but they're kids. It dawned on me kind of studying psychology and cognitive development that so our brain infrastructure doesn't fully develop, right?
Hmm.
I've heard this all my life, but was reading it in a textbook and kind of watching some videos on it and listening to some lectures. That's the truth. Like they don't have the cognitive infrastructure. The roller coaster of neurons and development hasn't got to that part of the amusement park yet called common sense. It
Yeah.
just hasn't.
Yeah.
It isn't built. And so that's where you got to step in. and they don't even realize it's not built.
Yes, sir.
It's when you see kids, and if
Yeah,
you're like, well, what do you want to do? There's times that's great. It really is,
sure.
you know. But in a lot of things, is you take an active step and a parent and have those purposeful conversations of whether or not I'm crushing that soul, or am I guiding, or am I throwing javelins, or what am I doing? Right.
Yeah.
You have to realize that these are decisions. We don't let kids take a 7,000-pound truck and drive it at 80 miles an hour down the road.
I
No, we
hope.
hope not, right? We
Yeah.
hope not. So these are same kind of decisions,
No,
right?
you're
Like
right.
let's help God through this process.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. And so I think that it's a good segue into the opposite side of the coin, right? Being intentional in encouragement and speaking life, right?
Hmm.
James tells us that there's power, there's life and death in the tongues. And for everyone that's listening out there, we all can remember something, as Jason said, where our little souls got crushed. And I don't think it was malicious or intentional. I think people don't know, again, in the heat of the moments and in different settings of how you were raised and different things, of that power. And we can all remember those sharp and biting words.
Hmm.
But Proverbs 16:24, gracious words are like a honeycomb, sweetness to the soul and health to the body. Matthew 3:17, this is my beloved son who I'm well pleased, right? Encouragement should not just focus on your achievements, but character and faith. And that's something that we see time and time again being reiterated, throughout the Bible, is that, you have to build someone up, right?
Hmm.
Jesus didn't come around and point out like, oh man, you dirty sinners over here. Look at you. I know what you did. You can't find that. Think
Yeah.
about the woman at the well.
Oh man, he
You
just
know,
talked to her.
he just talked to her. And even though he pointed out, like, hey, I know the husband that you're with ain't your husband and you had five others,
Yeah.
it wasn't saying that, hey, you're a expletive for someone that likes to sleep around. He didn't do that.
Yeah. We got terms for that.
And we do
Uh,
have terms for that.
Not only that, but he didn't sugarcoat wrong, right?
No.
He didn't sugarcoat the wrong. And he's like, hey, it's wrong. We're calling wrong wrong.
Yeah.
Let me show you how to redeem it.
Yeah.
Right? Let's get to a path of redemption. The whole Bible's about redemption. And I think about John Mark and Paul, right?
Mhm.
And we think about times we all got our souls crushed. And so here's John Mark. John Mark goes, and Paul's like, hey man, what do you mean you're turning back? I think John Mark was pretty young, right?
Yeah.
And he's like, what do you mean you're turning back? We're pressing forward. I've been shipwrecked, bit by snakes. We're moving forward. By the way, he's a go-getter, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
He's moving in a direction. And that had to crush John Mark's soul, because he's like, I love God and I love Jesus and I just want to do this. And the guy who wrote a ton of the New Testament later, he
Sure.
didn't write it, back then. He didn't
Yeah.
have it,
Yeah.
but he goes, get out of here. I'm like, man, I ain't got no use for you. That crushed his soul.
Oh,
But
of
if you
course. Yeah.
look, and this is where you and I were kind of talking about it, look at Peter. Peter calls him in First Peter, he calls him my spiritual son. Peter took time to heal him and to grow him, right? And then in 2 Timothy 4:11, as Paul is getting ready to die, and he goes, send Mark to me. He made sure those purposeful words were restorative.
Yeah.
Peter, when he failed Jesus, right? Man, that was a crushing blow. We've talked about it a ton. When Jesus restored him, he asked him 3 times, do you love me? And he's cooking over the same kind of fire that Peter was warming himself by, the coals, like the
Mhm.
charcoal versus wood, right?
Mhm.
Same one. It's that, how do you restore? How do you get them back on the track?
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
it's not, to quote my father who will listen to this, a bought lesson is better than a taught lesson, which was a good way of saying, I'm going to let you touch that electric fence and I don't have to discuss this twice.
No,
Ah.
there's there's something to that. I think, even, right, like sometimes, hey, as my dad would say, like, if you want to skate uphill, go ahead,
Give it a shot.
right? Like these
Yeah.
little sayings. But I think, as we look at like what's a practical thing as far as that encouragement, kind of like what you're talking about, you have to make affirmation a
Mm,
part of your normal communication. Because kids, all of us can see through like, okay, well, here comes dad. He's trying to be fake and good. Like, what's up with this, right? You don't want that. You want it to be genuine,
no.
right? You want to be able, and
Yeah.
again, that's building, as Jason said, ground to fight from in the future, where you do have to have maybe a negative conversation. Well, at least I have some wasta with you. I built a little bit of rapport, right?
Hmm.
Here's a couple that I wrote down that I see how hard you worked on that, and I'm proud of you not giving up, right? You showed kindness today, and that's what Jesus wants us to do. God has great plans for you. I can see it. You know, those little things, right? And it might
Yeah.
sound corny, you might feel cheesy doing it, but as a father, you're pouring life into your children. That's what you have to remind yourself. And I want to give the biblical example of this before I turn it back over to Jason. Is David to Solomon. As David's getting ready, after all David has done, he's getting ready to punch out 1 Kings 2, 2 and 3. David calls Solomon to be strong, but to also follow God's ways. Fathers, we have the deep and important responsibility to prepare our children with wisdom, not just worldly success, not just how to run a business, not just how to be a professional athlete, if that's what you're hoping that they're going to do, not just to be whatever it is in the world. You're to give them wisdom and help them have discernment on how to move through the world so they can find that success that they're looking for.
No, that's great. You know, mm, I had a thought and it just jumped right out of my head. Thank you, Colby.
Yeah, no
Uh,
problem.
no, you gotta, as a dad or as a parent, let me share something with you that the prophet has no honor in his own home.
Yeah,
Your kids will point out every single mistake that you make.
yeah,
They just will. So that's where this coming to be very true and very honest. Have I made mistakes? Heck yeah, I have.
yeah,
Have I messed up? Sure.
yeah,
What I try to do is I go, look, I've made a mistake. You know, maybe I got angry and I'm like, it's wrong. God knows it's wrong. Me and him are going to talk about that. And, I shouldn't have got upset. I'm going to move forward. Mm. It's, as dads, you got to be very purposeful in where you're guiding and where you're not. As a dad, this always struck me. You're not there to be a teenager again, right? You're not there as a parent. It doesn't matter if you're a dad, if you're a single mom or whatever, dad, mom, whatever. You're no longer kids.
yeah,
God puts you in a specific order as being the parent and them being the children. He didn't make you peers together.
yeah, yeah.
And so you can't be sitting there watching whatever atrocious cartoon or TV show and then tell them, well, you can't watch that. You know
Yeah,
what I mean?
yeah, it can be a
Like you
hypocrite,
can't,
yeah.
yeah, you can't laugh at, you know, I don't know. Is Family Guy, is that something? I don't
Yeah,
know.
that's an old one, kinda like The Simpsons that's still around,
Yeah.
yeah.
But like cause kids see that and they're like, oh, my dad thinks that's funny. And it's good to have a sense of humor, but be careful what you laugh at because you also advocate for, right? Because
Yeah,
kids want to be funny because they want you to love them.
yes.
You got to be very, very purposeful. I love what you had to say about what do you say? And so, when Jesus was baptized, the phrase comes out, this is my beloved son in whom I'm well pleased. At Mount of Transfiguration, this is my beloved son in whom I'm well pleased.
Yeah,
As a matter of fact, those are the phrases that readily come to mind when God speaks about Jesus,
yeah, absolutely,
as those
absolutely.
forms of encouragement.
No, and I think, really what we're trying to tell you guys is, you have to balance criticism and encouragement, and I love this principle that I studied out, and I saw it, like, it was like a light bulb of how the Father, how Jesus and a lot of the patriarchs, a lot of people operated in the Bible once they got to the place where God was using them, right? And it's called the blessing and the warning, right? Jacob blessing his sons, Genesis 49, 1 and 2. He gave them both blessings and warning. You see, Jesus replicate this in the New Testament when he was talking about, various things using the parables. It was a blessing or there's a warning. You do the right thing, right? The parable of the talents, for example, give you something and trust you with a resource. Think about your children. You're entrusted with that. There are blessings and warnings that go along with the parenting and having those conversations.
Mhm.
And fathers, we have to balance that affirmation and the correction to get to that place where you're really spiritually leading your children, right? And it's very, very important. You look at, again, Deuteronomy, right? The book of the law. There's
Yeah.
blessings and there's warnings. There's that is a to me like a big principle in how the Lord relates to us. God
Yeah.
relates to us as far as love, correction, and affirmation. Hey, I want you to be successful, right? He says in John 10:10, I came to give you an abundant life, right?
Yeah.
That's what Jesus tells you. But there's also, hey, you have to have some discipline. You have to be obedient. It's not this whole like I just do whatever I want and you're going to give me what I want. No
Yeah.
parent does that, right? Well, I shouldn't say that.
Oh,
No,
there's some free
no
range
good,
parents out there.
right? No good and loving parent just gives a child exactly what they want all the time because that's really not loving them, right? And so there's a balance. That's the whole point of what I'm trying to make here.
Yeah.
What lesson do you think you're really teaching? How did
Yeah.
God want slow down for a minute before we go into this parenting mode and ask the question, guys out there, what does God want? How does he want me to handle this? Is there some kind of, analog that I can find in the Bible? And that's finding that balance, Jason.
No, with everything you do, it's a message, right? And it's purposeful. Do you know that, by the way, people read body language way more than they listen to what comes out of people's mouth?
Oh yeah.
They absolutely do. And if you've been married any given length of time, you know that. Very true, because your wife may tell you it's okay. Or you may get our favorite restaurant is, it's up to you. I don't care. I've never found that place. I try, but
It's delicious, by the way, when you get there.
I have no idea. I've never made it. Yeah, that's always a contentious time. But you're a parent. And it goes with your spouse, it goes with anybody. It's purposeful conversations, right?
Mhm.
And you got to understand the situation. You also got to know, where do you want people to go? And I think a lot about the restoration. It's hard to talk about parenting and not talk about the parable of the lost son. And we phrase that, the parable of the lost son. As a matter of fact, in my King James, it's written in bold above, in Luke chapter 15, verse 11, it's written right above it. But really, there's two sons there, and neither one of them. We talked earlier about kids are more than the genetics you make up. Neither one of those neither one of those were a mirror of the father, right? The first one left and goes into the world, but he returns.
Sure.
And, it's so interesting. He's like, I'll just eat the pigs slop. I'll just, whatever. He
Yeah.
was out there doing that. And he goes, I'll just be a servant. But when he comes back, his dad even cuts him off where he says, I'll be a servant. Like, he doesn't get to iter or say those words, and, and he welcomes it. But the other son who's in there, he's not exactly the prime example, although he stayed and worked. You look at what he has to say in there, and he says, he can't, let's see here. He says, I serve thee. It's always I and me. He says, you
Mhm.
never gave me a kid that I might take and may have a party with my friends.
Mhm.
He wasn't interested in being with the father either. He just didn't leave.
Yeah. Yeah.
But the father was gracious to both those. He stepped out of the situation. And that's last week we talked about, get to the balcony. And you've got to step away from that emotion and go, this is where we are, and this is where I need to guide to that restoration moment, right?
Yeah. No, I love it, Jason, and I think I'll put my final thoughts in there, and I think we're gonna probably have a Jonathan's leftovers here for this week because there's so much, guys, that we wanted to kind of give you, but uh, please look for that on Wednesday, the Jonathan's leftovers for this episode. But I guess my final thoughts would be just a couple of key takeaways. Correction should build up and not tear down.
Mm-hmm.
When you're doing it from biblical place, when you're doing it as God wants us as men in his kingdom to do, you're building up and you're not tearing down. And that doesn't mean it's not a hard conversation. That doesn't mean that there's some little stern correction that goes in there, but you're building up and you're not tearing them down. Encouragement should point children towards their God-given identity. There's no mistakes. God forbid that someone out there is yelling, you're telling your kid you're just a big mistake or whatever. Think about the old Smoking the Bandit, Jackie Gleason, kind of moments. You don't want to tell a child that, right? Because God has a purpose for them, and your role as a father, right, is to help bring that out that they can honor the kingdom. And intentional conversations really do bring those stronger relationships. You want to have a stronger relationship with your children, your spouse, whoever it is. You have to be very intentional in how you're communicating. And as Jason set out very well, if you have a look on your face, if you have your screen in front of you while you're trying to have a conversation, you are sending messages that you may not even want to or even intending to send. But again, you have to be very, very clear on how you're speaking with those if you want to improve your communication with your children and those around you.
Yeah. Is a kind of my final thoughts is this. And when it comes to delivering a message, there's multiple parts. It's the speaker, the listener, and somewhere in between what's interpreted, right? You never realize the impact of the words you say. And this is, I'm going to let a little truth out. I've had people come up to me and go, "Do you remember when you told me this?" And what I really want to say back is I'm lucky if I remembered what I had for supper last night. But, and I've had people say things to me that I extrapolated pearls of wisdom from, right? And there were things that people said that I didn't, or that people said that I took as hurtful, and they didn't mean it. I think about the very comical scene on that famous movie Talladega Nights. And he's like, if you're not first, you're last. And that's what the mantra that kid lived by, Ricky Bobby lived by his whole life. And
Yeah.
his dad later in life goes, "I have no idea. I could have been high when I said that." Right.
Yeah.
And so a whole lot of parents don't realize that when maybe you're not high, but you're distracted by the iPhone, the other things or whatever. And you've now told this kid what value is, how to measure value. And they take that ruler and they measure themselves from that point forward. And
Yes.
they go, "If I'm not this, then that's it."
Yeah.
Right. So
No,
you
great.
got to be super purposeful in what you have to say.
No, I love it, Jason. And that is a great way to wrap up yet another great episode of the Jonathan Project podcast. If you found this episode or any of our episodes great, please reach out to us at the Jonathan Project podcast at gmail.com. Again, the Jonathan Project podcast at gmail.com. This episode and every episode comes out every Tuesday morning at 6 a.m., at least Eastern time, earlier maybe where you're at, but you can find it on Spotify, Apple, iHeartRadio, Amazon Music. You can find the Jonathan Project podcast. Please subscribe, download. Our link to subscription will always be in our comments for all of these episodes. And on behalf of Jason, thanks for yet another wonderful time spent here talking about a really important conversation. Join us on Jonathan's Leftovers. We're going to kind of go over and talk about a little bit more that we couldn't get into this episode. But thanks for all your support and prayers for everyone out there. And we'll see you again next week.
All right. See ya.